Right, guys, it's still October the 2nd. We're going to look at some special tax topics, and we shall start with filing status and qualifying dependents. So, you must be familiar with the different filing statuses, residency statuses, the definition of a qualifying dependent, and the basic requirement for tax return filing to support the taxpayers you are working with if you are a tax preparer. Okay. So filing status says and qualifying dependents module. As a tax expert, you play an important role in helping the taxpayers you work with determine whether or not they need to file a tax return, or a federal tax return rather. You need to be familiar with the different tax filing statuses and residency statuses so that you can guide anyone to make appropriate decisions based on their situations. You'll also need to support them in determining whether or not they can claim their dependents on their tax returns. Okay, so let's get started. So there are several filing statuses. So this in this section we share information about the impact of filing status on taxes. There are five filing statuses, and each has various requirements that help determine the proper selection of the correct taxpayer. So if a filer's status determines the rate, okay, determines the rate at which their income is taxed. So that's important to get right. That means that a filing status can have a big impact on taxable income. It determines your filing requirements, your standard deductions, your eligibility for certain credits, and the correct tax. And the five filing statuses include: number one, single; number two, head of household; three, married filing jointly; four, married filing separately; five, qualifying surviving spouse. Okay, so that's single, head of household, married filing jointly, married filing separately, qualifying surviving spouse. Okay, so let's take a closer look. So, starting with the single, okay, a tax filing single is single when the person has never been married, is divorced or legally separated under state law, they were widowed before January 1st of that year, okay, and they don't have a qualifying child, or they do not qualify for any other filing status, such as head of household, okay. Again, to qualify for single status or status, you must have never been married, either never been married, or you must be divorced or legally separated under state law, depending on wherever state you are. Uh, that you or if you were widowed before January the 1st of that year and you do not have a qualifying child, or you do not qualify for any other filing status, which is head of household, right? Those are the four circumstances that would qualify you to file as single. Now, to qualify as head of household, if you paid for more than half the cost of keeping up the home, or unmarried or considered unmarried, okay? If the qualifying person is a dependent parent, they don't have to live in the same household. A person is considered unmarried on the last day of the year if they file, if, okay, if they lived with you, is a qualifying person provided more than half the cost of keeping up the home. Basically, if if your home is the main home of a child, stepchild, adopted child, or foster child for more than for half the year, and you're able to claim the child as a dependent, whether or not you actually do. Okay? If a person had someone living with them during the year, okay, they would they would need to answer questions pertaining to, you know, the person's residency for more than half of the year. Okay, they would include questions such as uh, what's the relationship with this individual or a child, right? What's the date of birth of this child? Uh, can someone claim this child as their dependent? Okay, and then did that child live with you for more than, or that individual that did they live with you for more than half of the tax year? Were they a qualifying dependent of another person, and if that person, child or whatever, did not provide half of their costs and they are a qualifying dependent, then the qualifying status would be head of household. Okay, if they did not. Okay, if they provided more than half, then it would be single. The filing status would be single. You get it. So let's go back again. If that dependent provided more than half of their own support, then your filing status would be single. If they did not provide more than half of their own support, then your filing status would be head of household because you provided for them. So if you provided more than half of the household's uh, obligations, then you would most likely qualify for head of household. Then qualifying surviving spouse. If a person's spouse passed away during the current tax year and you have not remarried, your filing status would be married, filing jointly or separately. If the spouse passed away in the previous 2 years, they would need to determine if they have a qualifying dependent. If they do, they're able to file as a qualifying spouse for the 1 or 2 years that they were not married. If a person files as a qualifying surviving spouse, they'll be asked whether their spouse died during the one of the previous 2 years. If yes, then you have to ask, were you entitled to file a joint tax return with your spouse for the year your spouse died? Okay. And then, did you pay more than half the cost of keeping up a home in the current tax year for a qualifying dependent? And then, if the answer is no to these questions, then you're not eligible for that status. Okay? Then, for example, you remarried, you do not have a qualifying dependent. you did not pay more than half the cost of keeping up a home in that tax year, right? Then you wouldn't qualify. So we're gonna stop right there. It's a bit of a conundrum. It's actually simpler than this, but just too much verbiage. And I'm sorry if I spoke too fast in areas or you know mangled my words. But that's where we shall stop on filing statuses.